All right, Uhuru, everybody. Welcome to the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and African People Solidarity Committee's live streamed study. This is episode 2 of a new monthly study hosted by the African People Solidarity Committee. So we're just going to let more folks come onto the stream. Be sure to share this and invite friends to watch. We have a very important study tonight entitled Why Chairman Omali Yeshitela's Definition of the African Nation Matters to White People. So my name is Casey Mackey, and I'm a member of the African People Solidarity Committee and Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and lead the Midwest region for these organizations, which are organizations of the African People's Socialist Party. Organizations of white people organized under the leadership of the African working class with the task to go back into the white community and unleash all the stolen resources in our communities to the African Revolution and to the struggle of African people to be free as a stand of reparations. So reparations is the cornerstone of our work. We stand for white solidarity with Black power and African liberation, and unity with all oppressed colonized peoples around the world, and very just appreciative of the African People's Socialist Party for creating this organization. And I have here tonight behind me the chairwoman of this organization of the African People's Solidarity Committee for over 40 years now, right? A little bit over 40. Penny Hess, who has devoted the last 40 plus years to building a movement of reparations, white reparations to African people under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, uniting with the call by Chairman Omali Yeshitela in 1976 for white people to unite with the leadership of the African working class and take a stand of reparations, and has been going all across the world to teach other white people about the reality of slavery and colonialism and the legacy of violence that we benefit from, and why we owe reparations, and why this is in our interest and our responsibility. So I'm very excited for everyone to be here tonight. Be sure to put your comments and questions in the chat. We'll have some announcements at the end, but for now I want to turn it over to my leadership, the chairwoman of the African People Solidarity Committee, Penny Hess.
Uhuru. Thank you, Casey Mackey, Midwest Regional Rep of African People Solidarity Committee out here in St. Louis. And I really want to salute everyone and thank you for coming on. And we're just going to wait a few more minutes for people more people to come on. So while we're doing that, what I would like to do is have a little commercial. Now, as a white person of the colonizer nation, have typical fine white hair that is actually literally white now, that gets static electricity in it in this cold winter in St. Louis. And if you may not be able to see it, but then it just sort of like crackles and does all this stuff. It won't stay down. So I was in the grocery store and I asked another white woman who had hair kind of like mine, well, what do you do to get rid of this electricity in your hair? And she said, I put those little dryer sheets on it that you put in the dryer to get rid of electricity in your clothes. And I'm like, that sounds horrible. So I didn't know what to do. So I found that the Decolonize Liberating Hydrating Mist, put out by the President Yejide Orimula of the African National Women's Organization. I just spray this on my hair and it just lays down. Totally great. So this is a great use and a way that we can deal with the horrible white hair, and also we can be part of reparations to African people. And you can check this out and get some the next time you're at an event where the African National Women's Organization is. They will be selling this on their table. Uhuru Planet sells it. And of course, a good way to do it is to sign up to go to the convention of ANWO, which is going to be, is it March 24th and 25th?
27th and 28th.
27th and 28th in Philadelphia. So Uhuru. Decolonize Liberating Hydrating Mist. So, Uhuru. All right, so I want to start this study, and I want to give a special shout out to Comrade Raya. I know you're on, and Virginia, and so many other comrades who are on. Really, really miss seeing you all, and just really want to extend, just our revolutionary love to you and to everybody. Kristen, Jake, all the people, Tama, people that I see on, Ron Hudson, Renee, Jesse, all our comrades are here, and this is a really important. Of course, Comrade Kitty is here in the room, ORED director, of course, and of course, Casey. So very, very exciting, and it's an honor to be here. And I wanted to begin by saluting my leadership and our leadership, Chairman Omali Shatella, the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, who has fought for the liberation of Africa and African people for over 50 years, and who leads the worldwide struggle for the total liberation of Africa and African people and the return of Africa's stolen resources into the hands of the African working class, and who founded the African People's Solidarity Committee, extending the vanguard party into the pedestal upon which all white people sit. And it's a profound honor. It's a very great responsibility. It's something that is going to destroy imperialism, the leadership of the African working class, and that this is the key, and the chairman has shown that it's the key to every question, to look at trying to solve this crisis of imperialism that the chairman has defined, to try to solve the coronavirus or this madness in the Democratic Party and the Trump versus, the Democrats and the two sides of the white ruling class that are waging a nonviolent war for control of the state, as the chairman has said, or to see the climate change, or all of the myriad things. This question of gentrification, which clearly is genocide of African people, that is just rapidly pushing African people out of their communities and homes, and just developing colonialism that we experience as the colonizers. And that the chairman has fought for this. The chairman has been the vanguard out there on the front lines for all of this time, always fighting for the interests of the African working class. The African working class as treated by imperialism, by colonialism, as the enemy, as the, just vilified every single day. And in the media, just on a regular basis, but also literally the movement of the African working class in the 60s, when it claimed the struggle for black power, therefore making it, as the chairman has said, a struggle that was anti-colonial in nature, that the U.S. government waged a counterinsurgency against that movement, destroyed it, and only Chairman Omali Shatella has kept this question alive, has forwarded the revolution of that, led by the African working class, that, as has been said, carries with it all oppressed and colonized peoples, keeps the anti-colonial struggle alive. Single-handedly, the chairman has done this. And I can only say that it's not surprising that the chairman and the party, the vanguard party, would come under attack. It does come under attack daily and constantly. And the latest of such attacks is happening in San Diego, where the chairman has been charged for being an anti-Semite by Zionists, because he is raising the conditions, the genocide, just the conditions that African people face today and have for the last 600 years, and that he has fought for the question of reparations And he is being censored. His voice is being censored by San Diego State University and others. And we have, from the African People's Solidarity Committee, have put out a position. It's on Facebook. It's on YouTube. We want you to stand with us and stand with the leadership of the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement in fighting this on the ground in San Diego. We are in complete unity with the struggle that they are making and are calling on white people also to stand behind the demands of the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement. And please watch the video that was put out by Mwambi from Impedum. Brilliant, just amazing statement, very powerful and very powerfully delivered in that video. So please share that. Please share the one from the African People's Solidarity Committee, and let's defend Chairman Omali Yeshitela. He must know that we have his back. That is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be the buffer between the colonial white power and state and the African working class and the vanguard party. We have to defend Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the African People's Socialist Party, and if there's not even words aren't even necessary. You can just look at what the party does everywhere it is. Its mission is on the ground. It's there. It needn't say anything else. And that's what we represent, the stand that is part of the strategy of the African Revolution inside the belly of the beast, behind enemy lines, as the chairman has said, raising the reparations not as charity, but as solidarity with an anti-colonial struggle that is the true redistribution of the wealth of the world. We return the stolen loot, which is the wealth that belongs to African people from a myriad of different ways. And that's what we're about in this. That is the revolutionary stand. That is the anti-imperialist stand. If you want to be part of curing the earth from this capitalist imposed climate crisis that it's in, then stand in solidarity with the African liberation movement. If you are fighting for white women, if you are fighting for LGBTQ in the white community, stand in solidarity with the African liberation movement under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Pay reparations. That is the anti-imperialist struggle. If you're against war and everything that the U.S. is doing, if you're against police violence, if you are against the mass imprisonment of African people, if you stand in solidarity with the indigenous people, with the Mexican people coming across their own stolen border, then stand in solidarity, join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, stand under the leadership of the African Revolution that is going to destroy imperialism based on the science that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has created, African internationalism together with theory and practice in the dialectical materialism and the democratic centralism of the African People's Socialist Party, carrying out in practice the ideas and vision that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has laid out, and that solves the problems of the revolution. So I just want to say to Chairman Omali Yeshitela, we stand with you. We will fight to defend the African People's Socialist Party, defend Chairman Omali Yeshitela, to say that we are white people who throw ourselves in front of the state. We stand in solidarity. We owe reparations. We want to turn over the reparations to the African People's Socialist Party. We want to see the Black Power blueprint be in every corner of this planet where African people are. And we want to see Africa be united, be victorious under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and the African Socialist International. I also want to salute Deputy Chair Onizine Yeshitela, who is a brilliant African leader, African woman who has just really made so much of what the chairman has talked about in terms of dual and contending power in the hands of the African working class a reality over all of the 50 institutions that are the economic/political institutions of the party that make the party different than anything else that's out there, that separate the party from all others, from the pack that would say it's revolutionary, that distinguishes the party because it can answer the question, to what end? This is the end. The end is the political and economic infrastructure of power that is based on an economy that will be the basis for true socialism on this planet. And that it's more than that, as the chairman has said, because the party has the tribunal on reparations to African people that is legal under international law. That is not a mock trial. As the chairman has said, it's imperialism's courts that are the mock courts. It's the fact that African people have a right to determine their own political process and their own political institutions. The party has the Black People's Grand Jury that indicted Darren Wilson and the state here in St. Louis and Ferguson, but it did not yet have the state power to imprison him. And the chairman does marriages. He more and more, this is what dual and contending power is in the hands of the African working class, that the people themselves can carry out all the function that the state provides to the colonized population. They don't need the state now. They don't need the colonizing state. They can create their own. And that's what's happening here. This is profound. This is part of history. And as always, I definitely want you to go to blackpowerblueprint.org. And we got to get to $30,000, by the way. And that's just a mere little step. So we only need $535 more dollars, or maybe it's $635 more dollars, but we only need that small amount to get to 30,000. So I just want to say that. I want to salute again Chairman Omali Shatella, our leadership, and Deputy Chair Ona Zinea Shatella, under whose leadership so many of us, really all of us, are in the African People's Solidarity Committee, Uhuru. And I want to salute all of the party members of the African People's Socialist Party and all of you who are watching here tonight. I also want to say that, the chairman has a wealth of knowledge that will still be consulted, will still be watched 100 years from now, 200 years from now, even when African people have power, that the chairman's studies, the hashtag Omali taught me study, that the chairman does consistently just about every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, in which the chairman is laying out in every possible detail what is the science of revolution? How do we understand the world as it really is? How do we begin to see the world through the eyes of the African working class and the oppressed and colonized of this planet? How does the African working class sum up the defeat through the counterinsurgency of the colonial state from the past period? And as the chairman has done, solve the problems, because this time around, they're winning. They are winning, and they're going to kick the ass of imperialism, and that's why this crisis is still there, is out there today. So, as we know, the chairman has many times had studies on the African nation, and this chapter, I'm using the Vanguard book, and if you don't have it, please do get it. You can get it at theburningspearmarketplace.com. And this was actually first published in the book Uneasy Equilibrium, which was the political report to the 6th Congress of the party that was in 2013. And this Congress was 2018, October of 2018. This is the political report from the 8th Congress. And once again, both the chapter on African internationalism and the chapter on the question of the nation were included in the book Vanguard, because this is the final word. This is so eloquent. this is so complete that it has to be part of almost every book the chairman's ever published and is going to publish. So please get this book. Please study this. We're going to study this question of the nation tonight. And it is so significant. It is so exciting. And I'm, and you might be saying, well, why do we have to study the question of the African nation as white people? Can't we just fight racism? And of course, that is ridiculous. No, we can't, because racism is part of white nationalism. It is part of upholding imperialism. It's trying to live with imperialism. It's trying to make a deal with it. It's trying to improve it and reform it. And it can't be that, because as we know, the chairman has put out that capitalism was born through the assault on Africa. Capitalism was born through imperialism. Imperialism is not the late stage of capitalism, as some have said. That capitalism was born through imperialism, through Europe, leaving Europe as conquerors and imperialists, waging the assault on Africa as long ago as 600 years, turning African human beings into commodities for sale, human trafficking, stealing the labor power, making Africans into machines for sale, working them to death, taking away their freedom, taking every idea from them and all the resources of Africa that are still being plundered today. This created the greatest wealth that has ever existed on the planet. And along with it goes the genocide of the indigenous peoples. When we talk about human extinction, this human extinction has been going on for 500 and 600 years. It's already wiped out whole sectors of the human population. It has, in the Caribbean, there are no more indigenous people called the Haiti or the Arawak. They're gone. There's not any of them left. And this is, so the people have been through this already. And we are talking about what this system has done and how it was born, as the chairman Omali Shatella lays it out. And the colonial domination of the majority of the planet Earth. This is what we live on. And that's why we are the colonizer nation. That's why it is absolutely a fairy tale to talk about something against racism. It doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. Yes, you can pay $2,500 and go to a dinner, drink some wine, and try to unlearn your racism, but you would do far better putting that $2,500 into the Black Power Blueprint that is going to concrete programs for political and economic power in the hands of the African working class. So we have to understand the question of the nation, which goes along with the question of colonialism. African people, as the chairman says, are not a race. They are a nation of people that's been forcibly dispersed around the planet Earth. And, we know this question of the nation in terms of the white nation. And any of you, and I'm sure from a lot from our audience, there are people who have had this experience, I certainly have, where you've been at maybe some kind of sports event, and they start to play the what do you call it, the flag, the national anthem of the United States, and everybody stands up, but you don't, and people look at you like they're getting ready to call Homeland Security, so whatever it's called, on you. They're like dagger eyes at you. You're not standing up. You're not saluting the flag. You're not doing these things. That's the white nation. I was in the airport here in St. Louis a few months ago, and I was waiting for a plane, and it was very crowded where I was, so some people were already standing, but all of a sudden, the one of the Southwest flight attendants starts screaming about everybody has to stand up and cheer, because on the gate next to us, these ancient, 200-year-old white veterans were getting off the plane who had, we're supposed to stand for them because they were war veterans for the U.S. And of course I didn't stand. I was reading my email on my phone, and I was, there's no way I could stand, but all the white people were standing, cheering, just crying. I mean, it was insane. And I look around and I'm like, am I the only person that's sitting down? And I practically was. So, this is it. This is the nation. This is the white nation. And even the term white nationalism, which is something that we hear, you can sometimes even hear that on the bourgeois media. He was a white nationalist and this kind of thing. It shows the white nation that the chairman talks about, the white nation that is white and Christian. And that is the nation. And as soon as an imperialist country, as soon as Europe colonizes a people, they take away and destroy their nation. And they start calling them things like the chairman points out, shrimp, like in Cameroon. They name African people shrimp, which is, Cameroon is the Portuguese word for shrimp. So, they start telling African people that they're Black Brits or they're African Americans, or other, as we know, horrible names that white people call African people. They destroy the sense of their nation. That is really, really part of it. They have to tell them if they are African people from Algeria, oh, you're French. If you're from Vietnam, oh, you're French now. You're under us, you're French. And you have to aspire to your Frenchness. If you're British, if you're being colonized by the British, oh, you love the Queen. The Queen is your, whatever. And so this question of nation, the nation, is really important for us to understand, and we have to understand it as Chairman Omali Yeshitela has laid it out. So I want to read, and this chapter, which, by the way, if you don't have the book, you can get this chapter in PDF form on the Facebook event page, I think it is. There's a link there. There's a link under the meme and the page description. So you can, it's going to be the chapter as it was printed in Vanguard, so we will be using the same page numbers, and you will know. So I will not be able to read this whole thing. And I do hope that if you have never seen the chairman give a study on African International, or actually the African nation, that you will go to the Burning Spear channel on YouTube and see the many times, you can pick from many, many times when the chairman has done a Sunday morning study on the African nation, and every time you learn more. So watch all of them and you can really understand it. But I want to read parts of this and then, open it up for discussion. And any questions or comments that you might have, you can put them in the chat. And I see, I see a lot of different comrades on here. I really want to salute all of you. So, if you have any comments or things, we will be able to have a discussion after this. So I want to start on page 329 of Vanguard, and it's 329 on the reading that you have. If you are using an uneasy equilibrium, then it will be a different page number. But this is not the beginning of the chapter, but it's where there is a quote starting from Hosea Jaffe, A History of Africa. And the chairman quotes from Hosea Jaffe a lot, and there's other books where he uses even more from this. I absolutely recommend that you would get that book, A History of Africa, because it's very profound in terms of what he is recording of what Europe did and how Europe colonized Africa and what it meant for Europe. He was very astute at that. And so the chairman uses him a lot to give some background and even some factual history to this understanding of this political theory of African internationalism and the question of the nations. So I'm starting about halfway down on 329, and it says, this is the point made by Hosea Jaffe in his book, A History of Africa. So this is the quote from him, and it's saying, the 15th century then saw the multiplication of the primary accumulation of European capitalism, and Africa played the most important part in the process as the principal arena of European colonialism, the very genesis and foundation of the capitalist system. From the turn of the 16th century, the Americas and Asia were added to this foundation, and out of this totality arose capitalism and modern Europe itself. Before capitalist colonialism, there was no Europe. Only a collection of feudal, mercantile, and tribal towns, farms, villages, discrete states, and kingdoms vying and warring with each other, just as in Africa, but on different property basis, that of private property in the land. Europe then was neither a concept nor a reality. At most, a vague idea that Arabs, but not Europeans, had long ago of some place northwest of Greece. As long as Europe remained isolated from the world, there was no Europe. When it became connected with and depended on first Africa, then the Americas, and finally Asia, it began to become a reality and an idea. Only when Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, Dutch, English, German, Danish, and Swedish confronted and clashed with Africa, America, and Asia did the need arise for them to consider themselves as a set, a whole, different from, hostile to, and eventually superior to Africans, Americans, and Asians. Colonialism gave them a common interest. And that is a really insightful statement, and the chairman has deepened that and shown how what he is talking about is the birth of capitalism, which is parasitic in nature. So the chairman continues by saying, this common interest, the sense of sameness, common history, and psychological makeup manifested in a common culture, elements contained in most definitions of the nation, was forged through slavery and colonialism. This was the nation-building process. The sense of sameness and common culture of violence are features of the subjective factors identifying the European nation. So, again, the sense of sameness and the common culture of violence are features of the subjective factors identifying the European nation. Contrary to white leftists and modern-day Marxists, both the white ruling class and the white working class owe their existence to this process. They are historical twins. I love that.
Yes.
We are historical twins. That's why white workers, as a set, as a class, always support, identify with, and aspire to be the white ruling class. So, the historical twins contain the same DNA and are spawned by a history of genocide and enslavement of other peoples that is repugnant in its entirety. The parasitic capitalist economy is the objective factor, the material basis upon which the subjective relies. It is the bonding element of the nation that holds this collective community together. And that is really profound. Our identity at a football game, at a, some other place where, at school, when they're doing the Pledge of Allegiance, or any place else, our identity as white people is because of our unity of the culture of violence, of colonial brutality, slaughter, genocide, exploitation of African people, indigenous people, and oppressed and colonized peoples around the world. That is our identity. That is our DNA, as the chairman is saying. That's how it was formed. It doesn't matter if we're rich or poor. And every salute we give to that flag is a salute to violence, to slaughter, to genocide, to war, to occupation, to theft, to plunder, to rape, to pillage, everything that the U.S. imperialism does and represents and carries out against the oppressed and colonized peoples around the world. So the chairman continues, the European nation, and we do mean European, with its multiplicity of languages, classes, and internal borders, was born as a bourgeois nation, a white Christian nation, spawned through the blood and gore of slavery and colonialism, and resting on a foundation of capitalism, benefiting Europe at the expense of Africans and the rest of the world. Aspects of the European nation's subjective content, its self-perception, were forged through the assault on Islam during the Christian Crusades in the feudal era for control of much of the same territory in North Africa and the Middle East that imperialism is contending for today. However, the most essential component of Europe's subjective identification grew out of its history of genocidal aggression against Africa that included colonial slavery. Herein lies the process that bonded Europe into a single nation though differentiated by sometimes competing capitalist centers designated as countries and incorrectly identified as nations. This, like the anti-Islamic national component, is residual from the pre-colonial European feudal era, where contending European powers defined themselves primarily in relationship to each other, except for the united looting expeditions through the Middle East that occurred under the religious banner of Christianity. Uhuru, there's something on there at the screen. I don't know if that's important or not, Casey, or affects anything. Okay, thanks. Thus, the European nation was born white and Christian. Moreover, it was born as a bourgeois nation, as the center of capitalist production stemming from parasitic accumulation of capital flowing from colonial slavery. Even the European working class was born on the pedestal of colonialism and slavery, therefore ultimately realizing the benefits of an oppressor nation and identifying with its own bourgeoisie. Chairman is so eloquent, and that says it so well. The chairman continues, Marx was wrong. Feudalism preceded capitalism in Europe. Feudal society was defined primarily by the relationship between the nobility and impoverished peasants and serfs, agricultural workers who were tied to the estates of the feudal lords, who expropriated most of what serfs produced. While serfs could not be individually bought and sold, as was the case with Africans, the serfs had little or no rights that were granted by the lords. The role of the feudal state was to protect this relationship that required permanent attachment of the serfs to the landed estates. As we know, in describing the transformation of feudalism to capitalism, Karl Marx authored the term primitive accumulation, naming the European enslavement, genocide, wars, and occupations of oppressed peoples around the world as the source of the vast wealth extraction out of which the entire capitalist system was born. But Marx erroneously includes in his definition of primitive accumulation the internal process of European peasants and serfs being driven from the land through England's enclosure acts beginning in the early 1600s that privatized lands that had been collectively farmed by peasants for centuries. according to Marx from Part 8 of Volume 1 of Capital. He said, the economic structure of capitalist society has grown out of the economic structure of feudal society. The dissolution of the latter set free the elements of the former. The immediate producer, the laborer, could only dispose of his own person after he had ceased to be attached to the soil and ceased to be a slave, serf, or bondsman of another, to become a free seller of labor power, who carries his commodity wherever he finds a market. He must further have escaped from the regime of the guilds, their rules for apprentices and journeymen, and the impediments of their labor regulations. Hence, the historical movement which changes the producers into wage workers appears on the one hand as their emancipation from serfdom and from the fetters of the guilds, and this side alone exists for our bourgeois historians. But on the other hand, these new freedmen became the sellers of themselves only after they had been robbed of all their own means of production and all of the guarantees of existence afforded by the old feudal arrangements. And the history of this, their expropriation, is written in the annals of mankind in letters of blood and fire. And, so the chairman is saying Marx was wrong, because he is saying that the working class is, he's not saying that it's part of the pedestal sitting on the backs of the true working class of the world, which is the African workers who created the resources, who had to produce the primitive accumulation that enabled there to be factories, raw materials, and everything else inside of Europe that created the necessity for white workers and factories to replace the feudal system. And that the ability for white workers to work, to have a job, comes from the assault of the colonial domination, of imperialism on African people and the rest of the world. So the chairman, just says very emphatically, Marx was wrong. Though this process involves the creation of the social mobility and capitalist labor force previously prohibited by feudalism, it is not primitive accumulation. So that's really important, because white leftists, as he's saying, equate this, the fact that under feudalism there was what was called the commons, and the commons were land for grazing and even for raising crops that everybody shared, all the peasants shared. And, actually it was even, I guess, the nobility did not have total control over the commons. So they're saying that when the Enclosure Acts are when England privatized all the common land, and it was basically became private farms and private agriculture, and that was part of this. And they're saying that Marx says that is primitive accumulation. And he spends far more time. He spends 800 pages basically talking about that, and a couple of pages at the very end of the book about what he calls primitive accumulation, without ever describing it in human terms of what actually happened to African people. That took Chairman Omali Shatella and the narrative of what had been the object of history. So, this is a really, really critical point, and it's so clear. I mean, I think that most people would agree with me that once you see this, you're like, absolutely, that is so true. That is so true. It is recorded history. It is fact. And it's science. And it really can't be denied. And if you are denying it, then you're living in a world of idealism and metaphysics and everything else. You're not looking at the world as it truly is. So the chairman says, European capitalist society may have very well grown out of the economic structure of feudal society, but it was conceived by way of, quote, and he's using another quote from Marx, the discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the Aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. And, he also mentions in the quote the opium wars, forcing opium, the sale of opium onto the people of China. And every war, he's saying, in every war in the contemporary period is based on stealing resources from other peoples around the world. And the chairman continues to say, notably in Capital, Marx devotes far more pages to the conditions of peasants and serf in the transformation from feudalism to capitalism than he does to the enslavement and genocide that created immense wealth for Europe, but destroyed the lives and means of production for millions and millions of Africans and oppressed peoples for centuries to come, and still is true today. Equating the removal of the European peasants from their land with the fact that Europe transformed Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins is a historical lie. It relegates African people to mere footnotes of history. The expulsion of the peasants from the land is a result of the process of primitive accumulation of capital, not part of it, right? I mean, that is so true.
Yes.
Because all of these resources were flown, because sugar, because they had to make ships for the trade in African human beings, because they now had tobacco and coffee and gold and silver and everything being stolen from Africa and around the world. They needed workers in factories. They didn't need the feudal lords with their peasants out there dancing around the maypole or whatever. They did not need that anymore. They needed workers. And so therefore it was a result of the primitive accumulation of capital, the theft of African human beings and resources and land and everything else that was going on. That's what created the Industrial Revolution. That's what created the factories of Liverpool and London and France and everything else. So the expulsion of the peasants from the land is a result of the process of the primitive accumulation of capital, not a part of it. Ultimately, the former serfs became European workers who now also sit on the pedestal of our oppression and benefit from it enormously. This Eurocentric error by Marx subordinates the historical basis of the existence of Africans and others to the requirements for European development. Wow, I mean, that is just so deep and so true. African people, even by the revolutionaries of the time, were nothing more than the requirements for European development. That was never thought of as the key component of revolutionary struggle. And this is why white workers have never been a revolutionary force, always been opportunists, always worked to become equal with the ruling class, to share in the stolen loot. And that's what we're seeing now with Bernie Sanders and anything else that's called socialism in Europe, in the United States, etc. So the chairman continues. It objectifies the history and civilization of African people, rendering us invisible and leading to wrong conclusions that disguise the bloody reality of parasitism, making it seem that African people exist merely for the needs of Europeans. This political report is replete with examples that challenge Marx's confusion on this issue when it comes to objectively describing the historical process that gave rise to capitalism and its impact on Europe and the development of capitalism Hosea Jaffe quoted earlier in this chapter, and the African People's Socialist Party do a better job. Marx's lack of clarity obviously stems from his own social location on the pedestal of African slavery, a location that provided the superstructure for the European capitalist society within which Marx's consciousness was forged and that his life's work relentlessly criticized. In One People, One Party, One Destiny, the political report to our party's 5th Congress, we commented on the tendency by Marx to muddle this issue. Here is the selection. We have to note here as well that Marx's description of slavery as an economic category and his concept of primitive accumulation provide outstanding examples of the historic objectification of African people by Europeans. The entire historical process that resulted in the total disruption of the political economy of Africa, the imposition of colonial borders, and the capture and dispersal of millions of African people, of Africans whose forced labor was responsible for the development of Europe and European society, is characterized as an economic category. Marx reduced the process of European pillage and plunder of the world and the ensuing genocide and enslavement to primitive accumulation of capital, a footnote whose function in history is to explain the development of Europe. In other works, Marx develops the concept of the fetish of the commodity to explain how commodity production for the market, obscures and mystifies the relationship between people, allowing it to be confused with a relationship between things. A similar thing happened with the concept of primitive accumulation. Here, the relationship between peoples and countries is also obscured and mystified. Marx attributes European development solely to the genius and productive forces inside of Europe. He is thereby covering over or liquidating the origin of such development in the parasitic impairment of the capacity of the independent development in Africa and other places victimized by Europe. So, I just think that is a profound and completely clear analysis, in short, in a nutshell, of the European nation and of the nature of it as a parasitic entity that relies on the destruction of the African nation in order to exist. And I wanted to go also to page 360, and I wanted to read the section that is Who is an African? So page 360, the chairman says, who is an African? We can see our commonality in Africa. But as we pointed out earlier, no nation is defined solely in relationship to itself. To say that the nation is one thing is to say that it is not another. Dark skin is a product of equatorial Africa, the land of black people. Black people among ourselves would be incapable of defining ourselves as such. It is through our relationship with, quote, white people and the dialectic of the oppressor nation and the oppressed nation that Africans became, quote, black. We can say, therefore, that the African nation is one born of its historical ties to its African national homeland, with a core sense of sameness that includes a common culture, history, and physiognomy. Still, to arrive at a full definition of the African nation, we must say more than this. The African nation is informed by historical necessity, determined by our conditions of existence at this very moment, hundreds of years subsequent to our defining conflict with the European predator nation. Europe's parasitic attachment to Africa and Africans shapes and determines both its successful existence and our national incoherence. A critical feature of our conditions of existence as a people is the imperialist, near total control of the economic life of Africa and African people wherever we are located in the world. Neither Africa, the land, nor Africans, the people, both fundamental components of the productive forces, have been accessible to Africa for the production and reproduction of real life for Africa and Africans. So our ability to produce and reproduce real life, which is the essence of what society is made of, comes at the expense of African people being able to produce for themselves their own lives and reproduce their own people. Hence, Africa has created staggering wealth for imperialism that has benefited the entire European nation, ruling class, middle class, workers, and others at our expense. Everything they have was stolen from our labor, resources, and knowledge. We have a historical mandate to take back what is ours, fulfill our destiny as a united, independent, self-governing nation in control of our own continent and future. That is the inevitable trajectory of history. African people will take back what belongs to them, which will plummet the parasitic capitalist system into the trash bin of history and be able to win a world revolution in unity with all oppressed and colonized peoples for a socialist world system in true sense. And let's see, where am I here? Katie's trying to tell me that there's time limit here.
7 minutes of reading for readings.
Okay. So I do want to read this part though. Sorry. So I might have to go over it a little bit. I want to read just a little bit here, a few more pages. So this is a very important part because this is where the chairman is defining what is the African nation. And it's really amazing. So let's see, where was I? Everything they have was stolen from our labor, resources, and knowledge. We have a historical mandate to take back what is ours, the chairman is saying, and fulfill our destiny as a united, independent, self-governing nation in control of our own continent and future. This is an immensely profound reality that must be internalized by Africans and all peoples throughout the globe who have an interest in destroying forever this blood-sucking culture of violence stemming from U.S. European imperialism. Therefore, historical necessity, the absolute requirement of any people to produce and reproduce life as a condition of existence, survival, and a meaningful future requires the consolidation of the African nation. The consolidation of the African nation is in our interest. It is in our interest. It is truly the only way that the problems on the planet can be solved. It is the only way that there can even be a future on this planet. The consolidation of the African nation is a prerequisite for overturning the abject, genocidal conditions of existence of Africans everywhere. There is no separate solution for the liberation of African people based on colonially defined borders or identity any place on earth. Clearly, the African liberation movement has run into its limitations when fought within the context of these borders. And of course, the chairman has made that clear so many times, that Africa has been divided up into 52 states, so-called states, by European imperialism for the sole reason of facilitating the theft of the resources, and to bring them into the various European powers, colonial powers. The consolidation of the, okay, I read that. There is no separate solution for the liberation of African people based on colonially defined borders or identity any place on earth. Clearly, the African liberation movement has run into its limitations when fought within the context of these borders. Civil rights and flag independence only serve to obscure our oppressive exploitation, not overturn it. Millions of Africans have been forcibly dispersed from Africa throughout the world. Europeans and others have come to Africa, some as colonizers, some as subjects of colonial powers, who were allowed privilege in Africa as intermediary colonial agents, functioning as buffers between Africans and oppressors, a situation contributing to absolute African dependency and the atrophy of African productive forces. Other occupants of Africa are descendants of the Arab conquest in Africa, preceding that of Europe. How do these various forces fit into our definition of African nation? First of all, the chairman says, all black people forcibly transported to diverse parts of the world as part of the process giving rise to capitalism and the European nation are Africans, period. Secondly, all black people throughout the world are potentially part of the African nation, whether they were part of the forcible dispersal or whether their presence in other places predates the assault on Africa. This includes black people in Australia, India, and other places who generally experience a sense of sameness associated with African blackness and the oppression we share because of our blackness. Under imperialist world domination, blackness is universally perceived as justification for our oppression. For those Africans forcibly dispersed from Africa, we are directly connected to each other by the parasitic capitalist world economy, under whose weight we continue to groan in poverty and oppression as the economic foundation of the European nation. All our cultural expressions found everywhere we are dispersed, music, dance, and other art forms and traditions, have their foundations in Africa. The African nation and Arabs, whites, and others in Africa. On the continent of Africa, our national homeland, there are many Europeans who came as colonizers. They have chosen to remain in Africa after nominal independence was declared in some territories, including Zimbabwe, Namibia, Kenya, and South Africa as prime examples. In South Africa, white people called themselves Africans prior to independence. Are these white people genuinely a part of the African nation by just declaring themselves so? The fact is that all Europeans, including those in Africa, are beneficiaries of the imperialist economy derived from African colonialism and slavery. This means they live at the expense of Africans. This places them concretely and objectively in the category of the European nation, even as they may now be forced to disguise their European national identity for the purpose of maintaining a parasitic attachment to Africa. This attachment of European colonizers to Africa objectively undermines the consolidation of the African nation, whose blackness is an identifying badge of exploitation and oppression. This does not mean that whites from the colonizing nation cannot become part of the African nation. What it does mean is that whites would have to commit national suicide, abandoning the interest of the European parasitic oppressor nation and uniting with the historical trajectory of the African nation to achieve black power. So, yeah, I mean, that is really powerful, that we have to commit national suicide. No way could we be in Africa or anywhere as part of the African nation and still have any relationship to colonialism and the pedestal in any possible way. So whites in Africa must unite with the capture of total economic and political power by African workers in a borderless continent. We have to be part of that. Power in the hands of African workers is the only way to unleash the productive forces of Africa, allowing Africa and Africans to engage fully in the process of producing life for Africa and Africans the world over. Objectively, this would mean white people in Africa would have to voluntarily relinquish to the African nation the vast resources they have accumulated through their past identification with the parasitic European nation. So you have to give up that stolen land, the wealth, the difference between life in Cape Town, South Africa, occupied Tanzania for white people, and the Africans who are forced into really reservations called townships within the continent of Africa and in what's called South Africa. In the final analysis, the struggle against world capitalism, resting as it does on the exploitation of the majority of the peoples of the world, will require the destruction of the white or European nation that requires for its existence a parasitic relationship to the majority of humanity. The national liberation of Africa and African people will be a leading force in that destruction. The role of genuine white or European communists will be to actively engage in the commission of national suicide by becoming one with the national liberation of Africa, Africans and others. This is a far cry from the current position of most self-declared white communists who talk instead about the need of the oppressor nation of the world to unite with their narcissistically defined European version of history. So committing that national suicide means paying reparations. Yeah. It means turning back over the stolen resources. It means stopping the flow of blood-sucking parasitic capitalism and turning it back over, returning the loot to those from whom it has been stolen in their struggle for state power. A similar situation is that of the Arabs who came into Africa as conquerors, initiating their enslavement of African people that lasted 1,500 years and paved the way for European transatlantic slave trade. Similar to Europeans, Arabs must embrace the historically necessary trajectory of Africa toward black power as their own. We saw that, the chairman says, they saw that in the 1960s. We saw the potential of this kind of unity in the 1960s when Gamal Abdel Nasser of Europe stood as one of the strongest allies of Kwame Nkrumah in his attempt to create a united Africa. He really fought for that. Ahmed Ben Bella, a revolutionary fighter and first president of liberated Algeria, was another who cast his lot with the African nation. Both men shared with Africa a sense of sameness that showed promise for consolidating all of North Africa into the African nation. And you notice how imperialism always refers to sub-Saharan Africa. They always separate North Africa from the rest of Africa. And, they always quote the poverty and everything else. Well, yeah, and there's huge poverty also in North Africa. And in the 1960s, there was a tremendous sense of one united Africa, and that Arab people were Africans. And that was a very powerful moment in history. The addition to the practical examples of Nasser and Ben Bella, there is the example of Black Haiti, which upon achieving independence from France in 1804, created a constitution declaring citizenship and land ownership for blacks only, but which defined whites, including the Poles who fought with Africans in the struggle for independence, as black for the purposes of citizenship. In fact, the Constitution of liberated Haiti, which is a beautiful document, and people can find it on the internet, says that all citizens shall be known as black. And that is really powerful. So a white person could stay, but they cannot be the colonizer, they could not be the slave master, they could not be the mestizo or whatever else gave them access to the pedestal. They had to be under the leadership of Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the African working class. And there were white people that did that. So let me see where I was here. This was a historic case of whites committing national suicide and consciously abandoning the pedestal upon which the European nation rests as a parasite on Africa and the world. This is a case of Europeans accepting as their own struggle for the achievement of revolutionary black power. We also mentioned the presence of in Africa of people from India and other former colonies who were brought to the continent by the British for the express purpose of acting as a colonial buffer between the imperialists and the often resisting African masses. There are literally millions of Indians in Africa today, most of whom live at a much higher standard of living than both the majority of Africans and the majority of people in India. This shows how the pedestal upon which Europeans sit on our backs can be and has been opened up to the petty bourgeois sectors of formerly colonized countries who now enjoy the benefits of white power at our expense. And we do see that inside the United States. I mean, people who come here from other colonies and step up on the back of African people to be part of white power, even though they do experience certain of the attacks by colonialism, by white power and white nationalists. And so that is what's happening. And it is possible to come here from another place and have the American dream and step up on the backs of African people. So thus Arabs, Europeans, and residents of Africa from other European colonies can become African if they commit national suicide and abandon their parasitic relationship to African people. They must financially, politically, and in every other way unite with the leadership of and become one with the African working class and the aims of a united and liberated Africa. And then, I just want to read a little bit more. The chairman is saying we are Africans because we say we are. The African nation, then, is a community of people whose core identity is based on historical ties to the equatorial continent of Black Africa, contributing to a common culture, history, and physiognomy. The African nation is also comprised of all those African people who have been forcibly dispersed to various places in the world through colonial slavery. Dispersed Africans were part of the process of the development of capitalism and the European nation, a process that requires our subjugation and national incoherence. Additionally, the African nation is comprised of many who experience a sense of sameness, a subjective connection to Africa, mainly because of skin color, that helps to define their imperialist-inspired, impoverished, and oppressed state of existence. The Dalit in India, the indigenous of Australia, and other areas where the African presence goes back to the earliest times, such as the Asia-Pacific region, are included in this category. Finally, the African nation can include people of other nationalities living in Africa who commit national suicide, becoming part of the African working class, and abandoning all allegiance to a predatory colonial relationship to African people. The truth, simply stated, is we are Africans, whatever else we may be called, because we say we are Africans and we feel like we are Africans. Africa is the homeland of all Black people worldwide. It is the land to which the identity of the African nation is firmly and irreversibly affixed. Our historical connection to Africa represents the critical element of the material basis for African nationality. For although we have been forcibly dispersed by colonial slavery and related factories, factors subsequent to the initial European attack on Africa, our current conditions of existence, both in Africa and abroad, are essentially defined by the consequence of our forced dispersal. So basically, I'm going to stop there, but I feel that that is a really amazing chapter. And I also want to say that this is evolving, because as the chairman has said, that the African struggle also has a basis in the Americas, and that African people are part of the struggle of the Americas, and that the relationship between African and indigenous is deep. It's not just allies, it's in the DNA. And the Olmec are called the mother culture of South America. And so the party really made history at this past plenary when, for the first time that I know of, it accepted people into the party whose primary identity is as indigenous. And that was very profound. That is going to continue to evolve, and we will see that. But that is the question of the African nation undergoing its evolution in really a powerful way. So, the chairman says, well, if Africans, if black people identify as Africans, then who are we? Well, we are the colonizers. We are the colonizer nation. We are the oppressors. We are part of the oppressor nation. And to me, to have that understanding is very liberating, because I can't say that I could ever unlearn my racism. How could I? Everything about this society is about that we've just seen that. It's in the DNA. But I can take a stand in solidarity with the anti-colonial national liberation struggle of African people led by the African working class. I can pay reparations. I can try to win as many other white people as part of the strategic positioning of the solidarity movement by the vanguard party onto the pedestal of white society. I can be part of that. I can take that on. I can carry out the strategy, and so can we all. And I want to, want to open it up for discussion, and I also really want to make a call for people on this, people from the colonizing nation in the United States, in Europe, in Israel, in South America. There's tons of white people, and they're in the same position. They're the colonizer in South America, in Africa, on the continent of Africa, to join the African People's Solidarity Committee. You can get information about that. You can go also to uhurusolidarity.org. We also have African People's APSC-uhuru.org to find out more about the African People's Solidarity Committee. Join Uhuru Solidarity Movement and get organized, because these ideas are not for sitting in a cafe and discussing. These ideas, this political understanding of African internationalism demands action, and it demands defined action under the leadership of the African working class. You can't get an idea from the chairman and then try to implement it somewhere on your own. That's meaningless. That's ridiculous. It has to be under the discipline of the party of the African working class. And we've got to build this in the white society. We've got to commit national suicide. We've got to pay reparations and stand on the forward side of history. So I would like to open it up for any questions or discussion if we have any. And let me see, I'm trying to see, I don't know if people are texting.
Writing, I can make the announcements.
Pardon me?
Should I think we don't have a lot, or we just have some comments, but I can make the announcements.
Well, let's do this first, and then we can make announcements. Let's do this first. If we have anything that anybody wants to say, or or even, why you are part of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, the African People's Solidarity Committee.
We have a comment from Virginia.
Okay, Virginia. Uhuru, Virginia.
Virginia said, Uhuru Chairwoman Penny, I really appreciate the study and reading the passages that you did really brings it home in regards to African internationalism and white people's role under the leadership of the party.
Uhuru.
And we have people watching Kota from West Philly, Tama from St. Petersburg,
Uhuru, Kota and Tama.
Marissa Ricchetti from Portland,
Uhuru, Marissa.
John Hill Jr. from Harlem,
Uhuru, John.
Renee
Hill.
out in Philly.
Uhuru, Renee.
We have a few more whose names I can't see, but we also have Johan in St. Pete.
Uhuru, Johan.
And of course,
Comrade.
Raya.
Uhuru, Raya.
Wendy Craig from San Diego says, thank you for this excellent study and deepening our understanding of the African nation and our role of reparations.
Uhuru.
Sandy, she was in Seattle, right?
Somewhere.
Chairman is right. Question of the nation is key. That's why imperialism obscures it, calling the white nation the West. Munich Conference, Westlessness. Mike Pompey, the West is winning. Comment on that?
True.
We also have Kristen Forthman and Jake Scott from Spokane.
Uhuru, Kristen, Jake.
Kristen said it was so amazing to get to see the plenary and see Indigenous people join the African People's Socialist Party.
Uhuru. That was powerful. Very moving.
And
all right.
That's all I can see.
All right. Well, we will be doing this again next month. And we're generally, we might have to make changes sometimes based on events that are going on. And next month at this time, maybe the African National Women's Organization National Convention. I'm not sure. But we will have a study next month at some time. We'll let you know. And we'll get the topic out and just really want to keep building it, get more people on, and really get this political education out, speaking to white people. Uhuru.
Uhuru. So we just have a few announcements, and that is, the first one is that this upcoming Tuesday, February 25th, at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, which is 6:30 p.m. Central, which is 4:30 p.m. Pacific, and of course 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time, which everyone forgets. But 6:30.
Oh yeah, I always forget about Mountain Time.
Yeah. To our friends in Colorado. Oh, and it looks like actually we have a question from Kota in the thread, but I didn't see it. So Kota, if you're hearing this, can you text it or email it to me? And
it might be on YouTube.
It might be on YouTube, or I think they're watching on Facebook. But as I wait for Kota to either retype this question or text it to me directly, just for these announcements real quick. Yes, this Tuesday, February 25th at 6:30 p.m. Central, the Black Power Blueprint is going live on the Black Power Blueprint Facebook page and YouTube channel. And this is going to be a very exciting updates about the marketplace and outdoor venue space that has recently been constructed that looks beautiful, has tons of community support. So much work went into making this project a reality. And if you want to learn more about what that was and how you can support and what is to come, please tune in and hear from the featured speakers, Tacharwa Masimba, who's the Economic Development Director for Black Power Blueprint, as well as Kitty Riley, who is the Project Director in the Office of Reparations and Economic Development under the leadership of Deputy Chair Onazine Yeshitela, who coordinates all the economic work of the African People's Socialist Party. And of course, there's also going to be community members and neighbors who live by the Uhuru House and by the marketplace who will be speaking to what this marketplace is going to bring to this community, which is extremely economically starved by the city and where 30% of people live on $5 a day. So this marketplace is very exciting. So we need you to tune in on Tuesday, February 25th, and donate at blackpowerblueprint.org.
.org.
Our second announcement is, we mentioned it earlier, but the African National Women's Organization is having their convention this year in Philadelphia, March 28th through 29th. This celebrates 5 years of this incredible organization of the African People's Socialist Party to organize African women as leaders of the African Revolution. You can learn more and register at anwouhuru.org. And I think we have some moderators typing those links in the chat, so that's anwouhuru.org.
It's a lot in the chat.
And also you can support ANWO by going to decolonize.com to get products like the Liberation Hydration Mist that Chairwoman Penny used earlier, which is why her hair is so flat and beautiful, not frizzy. The last announcement is we want you to save the date and register for the Uhuru Solidarity Movement Annual National Convention, this year themed Reparations Uprising.
Uhuru.
This is a national conference to build white solidarity with Black liberation and reparations, to be held in the beautiful Uhuru House in St. Louis the weekend of April 18th and 19th. The convention will involve workshops and presentations on all the exciting campaigns of USM this year. So we want you to register at usmconvention2020.eventbrite.com, and I believe that link is being typed wherever you live. If you're in London, if you are in Spokane, if you are in Oakland or Colorado, you should come to this convention in St. Louis. Go ahead and get your plane tickets and register. We have a housing and logistics team that will help you get here. It is well worth your time. You need to be here if you're a progressive white person. This is a reparations conference in the home of the Black Power Blueprint, which is the most positive project in the world, led by the African working class, who will not take the system beating them down anymore. So if you're a white person that wants to join in that, you got to be there April 18th through 19th.
Uhuru.
So the question from Kota before we close is, can you speak to the importance of leadership in a vanguard party when it comes to this discussion? And then you can answer that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is a really important question, and that is the question in a lot of ways, because otherwise these ideas would just be ideas. And the chairman quotes Marx in saying that philosophers have tried to explain the world, but the struggle is to change the world. So you have to take the ideas of African internationalism and put them into practice. And that's what a party does. A party and the theory of African internationalism go together. And a party means the leadership of the African working class, because if there is not that leadership of the African working class cemented in stone in the leadership of the party, the interests of the petty bourgeoisie always rise to the fore, and the African working class, as the chairman has said, always fight for the revolution, and then the petty bourgeoisie and the neocolonialists take over. So this is in the interests of the African working class that can only happen through the structure of a party, through democratic centralism that consolidates the leadership and the interests of the African working class into a program that is voted on, adopted on, and won into the entire membership of the party and carried out day by day. That's what just happened in the plenary. The chairman put out the mandates, he put out the political basis that educated everyone as to what was the significance of this period, what was the work and the analysis of this period and the crisis of imperialism deepening every day, and what the mandates are, which include building the regional strategy, implementing the regional hubs, etc. So they go together. It's theory. That's what the party was called, the vanguard. Vanguard up, the unity of theory and practice. So it goes together. It's got to happen. So we salute the Vanguard Party and, call on everybody who can from the white community to join not only the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, but the African People's Solidarity Committee, the cadre organization directly under the leadership of the Chairman Omali Shatella, and the National Central Committee of the party, Uhuru.
Uhuru. That's a good place to close.
Yes, it is.
All right, so we'll see you at the convention in St. Louis in April. We'll see you on the Black Power Blueprint Live this upcoming Tuesday, and we'll see you for this study next month. Uhuru.
Uhuru, unity through
Reparations.